The battlefield was quiet. Too quiet. Smoke drifted across the broken ground like ghosts searching for the dead. The sky above was dark, painted with the scars of burning ships that had fallen from orbit. Fires still crackled in the distance, small reminders of the chaos that had happened only hours before. Private Elias Carter walked slowly through the ruins. His boots crunched on shattered glass and burned metal. He was tired, so tired that every step felt heavy, but he kept moving. The silence was strange to him. In war, silence could mean safety, or danger waiting in the shadows. He looked around. No gunfire, no shouting, no commands in his ear, just the hollow sound of wind blowing across the ruined battlefield. Elias had survived many battles, but this one felt different. It wasn't victory that hung in the air. It was something else, something heavier. The ground was littered with broken machines, both human and alien. Steel twisted with strange alloys, black blood mixed with red. The war had left its mark, and Elias could feel it pressing down on his shoulders. He moved carefully, his rifle strapped to his back. He wasn't searching for enemies now. He was searching for survivors. Maybe one of his own squad, maybe even a civilian trapped in the wreckage. That was what his heart told him to do. And then he saw it. At first, it looked like just another piece of wreckage sticking out of the ground at an odd angle. But when he came closer, his breath caught in his throat. It was a sword, not a human blade, not like anything he had ever seen before. Its surface shimmered faintly in the smoke, glowing with a light that seemed alive. Strange markings, symbols he couldn't read, ran along its edge. The hilt pulsed faintly like the beat of a heart. Elias stopped. His instincts told him to leave it alone. This was no ordinary weapon. This was something sacred, something dangerous. But another voice inside him, the one that pushed him to keep moving when others gave up, told him he had to know. He had to see. He stepped closer. The air around the blade felt different, almost heavy. He crouched down, staring at it. His reflection moved across the strange surface of the weapon, distorted like water. And then he remembered. The stories. This wasn't just a sword. This was the blade of the Kalari Queen, the alien leader, the warrior who had led her people across half the galaxy, leaving broken worlds behind her. Elias had heard the name whispered among soldiers, spoken with fear. The Queen was not just a ruler. She was a living legend. And this sword, this glowing living weapon, was hers. But why was it here? Why was it abandoned in the dirt as if forgotten? Elias hesitated. His hand hovered above the hilt, trembling. He wasn't sure if he should touch it. He wasn't even sure if he was allowed to. And then he saw movement. Not far away, a figure lay slumped against a broken pillar. The armor was cracked, the crown dented. Elias's chest tightened. It was her, the Queen herself. Even wounded, even broken, she radiated a kind of power. Her eyes burned with the last sparks of fury. But there was weakness there too. She had fought and she had lost. Elias didn't know what to do. Part of him wanted to raise his rifle, to finish the war with a single shot. But another part saw something else. He saw a woman, not a monster. A leader brought to her knees. Someone who had lost everything in one terrible moment. And then his gaze fell back to the sword. It wasn't his. It didn't belong to him, it belonged to her. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. Slowly, carefully, he wrapped his fingers around the hilt. The moment his skin touched the blade, he felt it. Heat. Not the warmth of metal, not the bite of fire. This was deeper. It was alive, burning into his hand as if the weapon itself rejected him. His eyes widened and pain shot through his arm. He gritted his teeth but didn't let go. Not yet. Step by step he carried the sword toward her. The Queen's eyes widened when she saw him approach. Her lips parted, her breath sharp. She recognized her weapon instantly. But more than that, she recognized the impossible. He was holding it, a human. He stopped in front of her, his hand shaking, smoke rising faintly from his burned palm. His voice was rough but steady. "This is yours," he said softly. "Take it." The Queen stared at him, frozen between disbelief and fury. Around them, shadows moved. Her soldiers, what was left of them, stood watching. Thousands of eyes filled with fear. The sword burned him, but he didn't drop it. Not yet. Because something inside him told him this moment mattered more than the pain. The alien soldiers stepped back, whispering among themselves. They had seen what no one thought possible. A human had lifted the sacred blade of their queen. Elias didn't know their legends. He didn't know their fears. He only knew that he wanted to return what wasn't his. But to them, he was no longer just a soldier. He was something else, something they could not face. The silence broke. It wasn't the crack of gunfire or the roar of engines. It was whispers, 1,000 voices hushed and trembling. The Queen's soldiers stood frozen, their armor glinting faintly in the firelight. Their hands still gripped their weapons, but their eyes told another story, fear pure, unshakable fear. They stared at the human holding their Queen's sword, smoke curling from his burned hand, and they stepped back as if he were some cursed creature. Elias didn't understand it. He thought they would charge him, strike him down where he stood. Instead, the line of armored warriors began to falter. Shields lowered, blades trembled. They were afraid of him. The Queen forced herself to rise. Her body was weak, her crown dented, but her voice still carried weight. "Hold your ground," she commanded, her alien tongue sharp like broken glass. But the command fell flat. Her soldiers looked at each other, uncertainty spreading faster than fire. Legends whispered in their minds. Prophecies they had grown up hearing as children. Tales of their sacred weapon, the soul blade of their Queen, the blade that no outsider could touch, the blade that would burn the unworthy, and yet, here was a man. A human, a creature they had mocked and underestimated. Holding it, the Queen's heart pounded. She wanted to believe it was a trick, an accident. She wanted to believe this man had no idea what he had done. But her eyes told her it was real. He had touched the blade and survived. Elias winced as the pain seared deeper into his palm, but he didn't let go. He pushed the sword toward her again. His voice was calm, almost gentle. "This isn't mine. Take it." The words struck harder than any weapon. They were simple, plain, and without greed. For her people, this moment was impossible. If another touched the blade, it meant one of two things. Either their Queen was no longer chosen by the blade, or the outsider was something beyond them. Neither truth was one they could face. The soldiers' whispers turned to cries. Some shouted warnings. Others backed away. A few dropped their weapons entirely. Elias glanced at them, confused. He wasn't trying to frighten anyone. He only wanted to return what belonged to her. But the reaction grew like a wave he couldn't stop. The Queen's chest tightened. She could feel her power slipping away. Not because of the human, but because of her people's belief. She tried again, her voice rising. "Stand firm. He is nothing." But her words no longer carried the same strength. The human didn't look like nothing. He looked like the end of everything they had been told to believe. Elias noticed her trembling hands. She was strong, yes, but also wounded. He could see it in the way she swayed, the way she clenched her jaw. He had seen enough soldiers in pain to recognize it. He stepped closer. "Take it," he said again. His voice wasn't a command. It was almost kind. The Queen's breath caught. She had fought humans for years. She had called them weak, fragile, ignorant. But now she saw something else. Something terrifying. Compassion. He wasn't claiming the blade. He wasn't claiming victory. He wasn't demanding her surrender. He was simply returning what wasn't his. And that was what broke her soldiers more than anything else. A conqueror they could hate. A tyrant they could resist. But a man who carried their sacred weapon and showed mercy, that was something they couldn't fight. One soldier dropped to his knees, muttering prayers. Another turned and fled into the smoke. The line shattered piece by piece. The Queen's fury flared. She grabbed the sword from his hands, her own flesh sizzling where it touched. The blade recognized her still, but her people had already seen the truth. Their fear was stronger than her command. Elias let go, his hand blistered and red. He didn't cry out. He didn't curse. He only stepped back, watching her with steady eyes. The Queen glared at him, her chest heaving. "Do you know what you've done?" she hissed. He shook his head. "I just returned what was yours." Her soldiers didn't hear his words. They only saw the burned human hand. They only remembered how he had held the blade, if only for a moment. And they ran. Armor clattered. Voices broke. The great Kalari Legion, feared across the stars, turned and scattered like birds in a storm. Elias stood in silence as they vanished into the smoke. His hand throbbed, the skin raw, but his mind was calm. He didn't understand why they fled. He didn't understand the legends or the fear. He only knew that the war for now was over. The Queen stood alone, her army gone. She gripped her sword tightly, Her eyes filled with a storm of rage and despair. For the first time in her life, she had lost not to a fleet, not to a strategy, not to a weapon, but to a man who had shown her mercy. And that truth cut deeper than any blade. Elias turned away, his shadow long in the fading firelight. His burned hand ached, but he carried no pride in what had happened. He didn't seek glory. He didn't seek power. He only wanted to survive. But somewhere deep inside, he felt it. The weight of something larger than himself. A whisper in the back of his mind. This moment was not the end. It was the beginning. The battlefield lay silent once more. The smoke drifted. The fires dimmed and the sound of fleeing footsteps faded into the night. Where once stood an unstoppable legion, there was now only scattered shadows, broken armor, and the bitter air of defeat. Elias Carter stood alone. His burned hand throbbed with every heartbeat, but he ignored the pain. He kept his eyes on the queen, who still clutched her sword tightly, her knuckles pale against the hilt. She was no longer surrounded by her army. She was no longer a figure carried by power and loyalty. She was a lone ruler, her throne of soldiers crumbling to dust before her eyes. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The queen's gaze locked onto him. Her expression was not one of gratitude nor of surrender. It was something deeper, something Elias could not name. Fury, disbelief, and buried far beneath a shadow of fear. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, sharp as the edge of her blade. "You have no idea what you've done," Elias did not answer. He didn't need to. His silence carried its own weight. The queen staggered back a step, her cloak dragging across the dirt. For the first time, Elias noticed the cracks in her armor, the blood seeping through the plates, the weakness in her stance. She was wounded badly, yet she refused to collapse. Her pride was a wall she would not let fall, even when everything else around her had. With a final glare, she turned and limped into the shadows, disappearing into the ruins where the smoke was thickest. Elias didn't follow. He had no reason to. The war, at least here, was over. But deep inside, he felt a storm rising. The days that followed blurred together. The human forces swept through the sector, reclaiming ground that had seemed lost forever. Cities once crushed under Kylari boots raised their banners again. Civilians stepped out of hiding, blinking in the sunlight as if seeing freedom for the first time. And everywhere Elias went, whispers followed him. Some called him a hero. Others called him cursed. They spoke of how he had lifted the queen's blade, how the sacred weapon had burned him but had not killed him. They said her army had run from him, broken by fear of what he was. Elias tried to deny it. He told anyone who asked that it had been nothing, that he had only picked up a sword and returned it. He said it meant nothing, but people didn't believe him. They believed the story instead, and the story grew. Across outposts, across ships, across entire colonies, the tale traveled like fire in dry grass. The human touched the blade. The queen fled from him. The war is ending because of one soldier. What had been a moment of confusion became a legend. Elias hated it. He had never asked for attention. He had never asked for fame. He had only wanted to survive, to help, to do the right thing in that single moment. Yet the galaxy had chosen to see more in him than he ever saw in himself. He looked at his burned hand, the skin scarred and rough. No matter how many treatments the medics tried, the wound never healed fully. The mark remained etched deep as if the sword had branded him forever. Sometimes, when he was alone, he swore he could still feel the faint hum of the blade's heartbeat in his palm. Far away, in the hidden corners of the galaxy, the queen gathered what remained of her court. Her throne room, once grand, felt smaller now. The walls of black stone, the banners of conquest, all seemed faded compared to the emptiness of her halls. Her generals knelt before her, but their eyes betrayed their thoughts. Doubt. Fear. The queen gripped her sword tightly. It still answered to her hand. It still pulsed with her blood, but the image of the human holding it would not leave her mind. She had seen him. She had seen the fire in his eyes, the way he did not crave power, the way he stood without fear even as the blade burned him, and she had seen her soldiers flee, not because of his strength, but because of what he represented. For the first time in her reign, the queen felt something new, something she despised. Weakness. Her enemies had not defeated her. A single human had, not by killing her, not by conquering her, but by simply existing in a way that her people could not understand. The queen clenched her jaw. She would not accept it. She would not bow to it, but deep inside she knew the truth. Her war had changed, and she was no longer certain she could win. Back at the human camp, Elias sat by the fire with his squad. They laughed, they told stories, they celebrated their victories. But Elias remained quiet, his thoughts distant. One of his friends nudged him. "You should be proud," the man said. "Do you even know what you did out there? You scared an army off their feet. You made their queen run." Elias shook his head. "I didn't do anything," he muttered. "I just gave her sword back." The others laughed, thinking he was being modest. But Elias wasn't joking. He meant it. To him, the moment was simple. To the galaxy, it was something else entirely. And deep inside, Elias feared what that meant. Because legends had power. Legends could inspire. Legends could destroy. And whether he liked it or not, he had become one. Somewhere in the dark of space, the whispers spread further. Across neutral worlds, across enemy fleets, across hidden networks. The human touched the blade. The chosen are not chosen anymore. The tide is turning. And in every corner of the galaxy, people began to believe. Not in the queen. Not in her armies. But in humanity. The queen sat alone in her chamber. The walls of black stone pressed in on her, heavy with silence. Torches flickered weakly, their light dim compared to the fire in her thoughts. She gripped her sword tightly, her knuckles white as if letting go would mean letting go of her power itself. Her reflection stared back at her in the polished surface of the blade. The crown on her head felt heavier than ever. She closed her eyes, but she could not escape the memory. The human. The way he had stood before her. The way he had held her sword even as it burned him. The way he had not begged, not demanded, not gloated. He had simply returned it, and her army had run. Her chest tightened, her teeth grinding together. Rage filled her veins, but beneath it, something else stirred. A word she had never allowed herself to feel. Doubt. The queen summoned her generals. One by one, they entered the chamber and knelt before her. Their armor was scarred, their eyes dark with worry. She looked down at them from her throne, her voice sharp. "Why did you run?" No one answered, her gaze hardened. "Answer me." One of the generals shifted uneasily. His voice cracked as he spoke. "My queen." It was not fear of the humans, it was him. The word hung in the air like poison. "Him," she repeated coldly. The general bowed his head. "The human who touched your blade." "The legends say..." "Legends!" she snapped, rising to her feet. The torches flared as if her anger fed them. "Do you mean to tell me that my warriors, my chosen, were defeated by a story?" The general lowered his gaze. "Not a story, my queen, a sign. The soldiers believe it. The people whisper it. The blade burned him, yes, but he lived. They say the sword acknowledged him, even if only for a moment." The queen's grip on her weapon tightened. Her eyes blazed. "He is nothing," she growled. "A fragile human. One soldier among thousands. He does not know our ways, our blood, our power. He cannot take what is mine." Her words echoed in the chamber, strong and defiant, but the silence that followed cut deeper than any reply. Her generals still knelt, but their faith was fractured. She could see it in their eyes even as they tried to hide it, and that terrified her more than she would ever admit. Far away, Elias sat in a small medical tent. His hand was wrapped in bandages, the skin raw and scarred beneath. The medics had done all they could, but the mark would remain. He flexed his fingers slowly, wincing at the pain. Outside the tent, he could hear voices, soldiers passing by, whispering his name, civilians asking to see him, to touch the man who had held the queen's blade. He didn't want it. He didn't want the attention, the awe, or the fear. He wanted to be left alone, but he couldn't escape it. Everywhere he went, eyes followed him. Some looked at him with respect, others with suspicion, a few with open fear. To them, he was no longer just Elias Carter. He was something else, a symbol, and that thought scared him more than any battle ever had. Back in her fortress, the queen paced. Her generals had left, their silence still burning in her mind. She struck her sword against the stone wall, sparks flying. "No human will take this from me," she whispered to herself. "No human will break what I have built." She thought of her empire, worlds conquered, species bent to her will, fleets that filled the stars. She had earned it all through blood and fire, and now it trembled. Not because of fleets, not because of armies, but because of one man. She could not allow it. Her pride screamed for vengeance. She would not wait for the legend of the human to spread further. She would not let her people believe in him. She would crush it. She would crush him. That night the queen gave her command. Her assassins, shadows of the Kailari, were summoned. Warriors who lived in silence, who moved like smoke, who killed without a sound. "You will find him," she ordered, her voice cold and sharp. "You will end him. His blood will stain the ground, and his story will end with his last breath." The assassins bowed, their eyes like stone. They did not question her. They did not whisper of legends. They only obeyed. The queen watched them vanish into the darkness. For a moment she felt relief, but deep in her heart a sliver of fear remained. What if they failed? What if the human was more than she wanted to believe? She shook the thought away, forcing herself to stand taller. "I am queen," she whispered to the empty chamber, "and no human will take my throne." Elias did not know what was coming for him. He sat by the fire with his squad that night, listening to their laughter, their jokes, their relief that the battle was over. He tried to smile, but his heart was heavy. He kept thinking about the queen, the way she had looked at him, the way she had clutched her sword, the way her soldiers had fled. He didn't know what it meant. He didn't want to know. But deep inside he felt it again. The whisper of something larger than himself. The beginning of something he could not control. And in the shadows beyond the firelight, unseen eyes watched him, waiting. The camp was quiet. The soldiers slept in their tents, their rifles resting by their sides. Fires burned low, glowing red in the dark, their smoke drifting lazily into the night sky. The sounds of laughter and chatter from earlier had faded into silence. But silence did not mean safety. Far beyond the edges of the camp, shadows moved. Silent figures wrapped in dark armor slid between rocks and trees with the grace of predators. They carried no banners, no torches. They needed none. They were the queen's assassins. Each step they took was careful, measured. They had hunted kings, generals, and rebels. They had ended wars before they began. And tonight their mission was simple: kill the human. Elias sat alone by the fire. Most of his squad had gone to sleep, but he couldn't. His burned hand throbbed, the scar itching as if alive. He flexed his fingers, staring at the red, twisted skin. The medics had told him it would never fully heal. The queen's sword had marked him, and no treatment could erase it. Sometimes, when he was still like this, he swore he could feel it, like a faint heartbeat beneath his skin. A pulse that wasn't his own. He shook his head, trying to ignore it. He didn't want legends. He didn't want whispers. He only wanted peace, but peace was not coming. Not tonight. The first assassin struck like lightning. From the shadows, a blade flashed. Silent, precise, aimed directly for Elias's throat. Instinct saved him. Elias dropped to the side, the blade slicing through the air where his neck had been. He rolled, grabbing for his rifle, but another assassin lunged at him. Dark shapes surrounded him, their movements inhumanly fast. Their blades glowed faintly, weapons designed not to kill loudly but to end life in silence. Elias's heart pounded. He fired a shot, too loud, too bright, but it struck one of the figures and sent it crashing to the ground. The camp stirred, voices shouting in confusion. The assassins did not retreat. They closed in. One of them caught Elias's wrist, forcing him down. Another raised a blade high, ready to drive it through his chest. Elias grabbed instinctively with his burned hand. The assassin's weapon froze. The moment Elias's scarred palm touched the assassin's arm, a surge of energy rippled outward. The assassin cried out, a soundless scream, as if something unseen had burned through him. He staggered back, his armor smoking where Elias's hand had pressed. Elias gasped, jerking his hand away. The mark on his palm glowed faintly in the firelight, pulsing like a living ember. The assassins paused. For the first time, their perfect silence broke. One of them whispered in the Kailari tongue, the word trembling like fear itself. Chosen. Elias didn't understand the language, but he understood the way they stepped back. He understood the way their eyes, once filled with cold certainty, now flickered with doubt. The mark terrified them. More soldiers from the camp rushed out now, rifles ready, shouting orders. But the assassins didn't press the attack. They retreated, melting into the shadows as quickly as they had come. The fight was over before it had fully begun. Elias stood breathing hard, his rifle shaking in his good hand. His scarred palm still burned, glowing faintly even as the light faded. His squad gathered around him, their eyes wide. What the hell was that? One of them asked, staring at his hand. Elias didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that the Queen's sword had left something inside him, something he didn't understand, and now even her assassins feared it. Far away, the assassins returned to their queen. They knelt before her, their armor scorched, their silence heavy. She looked down at them with fury in her eyes. "Did you kill him?" she demanded. No one spoke. Finally, one assassin lifted his head, his voice low. "We could not." The Queen's eyes narrowed. "Could not?" "He carries the mark," the assassin said. "The sword burned him, yet it did not destroy him. The mark answers to him. We touched it, and it burned us. He is chosen." The word echoed through the chamber like thunder. The Queen's face twisted with rage. "No," she snarled. "He is nothing, a man of flesh and weakness. He cannot be chosen." But even as she shouted, her hand tightened on her blade. Her reflection in its surface seemed to mock her, because deep down she knew the truth. The sword had not rejected him. It had marked him. Back at the camp, Elias sat staring at his hand. The glow had faded, but the scar still throbbed, alive with a strange heat. His squad tried to comfort him, but their voices sounded distant. Their words meant little, because Elias knew at last that he could not escape this. He was no longer just a soldier. He was no longer just Elias Carter. He was something else now, something the Queen feared, something her assassins could not kill, a symbol, and whether he wanted it or not, the galaxy would not forget him. That night, as he finally lay down to rest, Elias closed his eyes and whispered to himself, "I don't want this." But the mark on his hand pulsed once, faint and steady, as if to say, "It's already yours." The dawn after the assassin attack came slow and heavy. Elias sat at the edge of the camp, his burned hand hidden beneath bandages. He didn't speak much. He only listened. And what he heard unsettled him. The whispers had begun. They sent the Queen's killers, and he survived. I saw it. His hand glowed like fire. The sword marked him. He's not just a man anymore. Everywhere he went, voices followed. Soldiers who once saw him as just another officer now stepped aside when he passed. Some looked at him with respect, others with fear, but none looked at him the same. Elias hated it. He hadn't asked for this. He hadn't wanted it, but he couldn't stop it. The legend was no longer his to control. By midday, the rumors had already left the camp. Messages traveled faster than fire. A passing trader heard the whispers and carried them to another camp. A courier brought the story to a distant outpost. And before the sun set, the tale had crossed borders. Across battlefields and broken cities, soldiers began to speak the same words. The human lived. The mark burns for him. The Queen's sword has chosen. It was no longer rumor. It was prophecy. Far away in the marble halls of the Kylari throne, the Queen sat in silence. The reports lay scattered at her feet. Every one of them carried the same story. Her assassins had failed. The human lived. And worse, the mark had answered him. Her generals stood stiff and nervous, unsure if they should speak. Finally, one found the courage. "My Queen, the story spreads. Our soldiers are unsettled. Some refuse to march. They fear the mark." The Queen's hand tightened on her blade. The steel hummed faintly, almost alive, as if it mocked her silence. "Fear," she said coldly. "Fear is a weapon. They will fear me more." But her words, sharp as they were, did not silence the doubt in the room. Even her generals had heard the whispers. Even they wondered if the blade they served had turned against them. The Queen rose, her cloak sweeping across the stone floor. Her eyes burned with fury. "If the galaxy will not forget him," she hissed, "then we will remind them who commands the stars. Ready the legions. If fear spreads, let it spread with fire. If hope rises, we will drown it in blood." The hall trembled as her army was summoned. War would come. Back at the human camp, Elias's commander called him into the strategy tent. Maps covered the table. Reports piled high. But the room was strangely quiet. His commander didn't waste time. "You've started something," he said. "We can't put it back in the box. Do you understand that?" Elias clenched his jaw. "I didn't start anything. I tried to return her sword. And it burned you," the commander said. "Yes, we know. But to them, to our allies, to our enemies, that's not just a burn. That's a sign." Elias shook his head. "I don't want to be a sign. I don't want to be anything." His commander leaned closer. "It doesn't matter what you want. The galaxy has already decided you are the man who touched the Queen's blade and lived. You are the man her assassins could not kill. People will fight for you. People will die for you." Elias felt sick. He wasn't a leader. He wasn't a hero. He was just a soldier who had survived something he shouldn't have. But deep down he knew the commander was right. The legend wasn't going away. That night, Elias sat alone again. The fire flickered low. The scar on his hand throbbed. He unwrapped the bandages and stared at it. The mark glowed faintly like a coal that never cooled. He whispered to himself, "Why me?" No answer came, only the steady pulse of the mark, as if the blade itself still lived inside his flesh. Across the border in a ruined city, something remarkable happened. A squad of human soldiers found themselves surrounded, pinned down by Kelari forces. They braced for death, but then one soldier shouted above the gunfire, "Stand! Remember the marked man. The Queen's blade chose him, and we fight in his shadow." The words spread like lightning. The soldiers rallied, their fear replaced with fire. They pushed back with impossible fury, breaking the ambush and driving the enemy into retreat. The Kelari survivors fled, whispering to each other in disbelief, even far from him. The mark fought battles Elias had never seen, but not all whispers were of hope. In the darker corners of the galaxy, rival factions watched with interest. Smugglers, mercenaries, even alien warlords began to ask themselves, if the Queen's blade chose him, what does that mean? Could he lead armies? Could he claim a throne not his own? Some saw a savior. Others saw a threat. Either way, the name Elias Carter was no longer just a name. It was a fire no one could put out. The Queen knew this too. She stood on the balcony of her citadel watching her army gather. Towering machines, endless ranks of soldiers, ships rising into the sky. She gripped her sword so tightly the metal groaned. "This ends with me," she whispered. Her reflection in the blade seemed to smile back at her. Back at the human camp, Elias lay awake. His dreams were filled with fire and steel. With the Queen's face, her eyes full of fury, with her sword glowing, reaching for him, he woke in a sweat, clutching his burned hand. And for the first time, he realized something terrible. The mark was not just his burden, it was his destiny. The sky burned red. Elias stood at the ridge, staring at the endless horizon of ships, machines, and soldiers marching under the Queen's banner. Her army was a tide of iron and fire, stretching farther than the eye could see. He had heard the reports. He had read the warnings, but seeing it with his own eyes was something else. This wasn't just war. This was a storm. Behind him, human soldiers prepared defenses. Trenches cut into the earth, guns mounted on ridges. The ground shook as artillery rolled into place. They were outnumbered 10-1, maybe worse. And at the center of it all was Elias, his burned hand wrapped in fresh bandages, his rifle slung across his shoulder. He felt their eyes on him. Not just his squad, not just his commander. Every soldier in that camp stole glances at him. They weren't waiting for orders. They were waiting for him. The Queen's army stopped just beyond cannon range. From the heart of the formation, a massive transport unfolded. Its metal walls opened like wings, revealing a raised platform, and on it she stood, the Queen. Her cloak shimmered in the wind. Her golden blade rested at her side. Her voice carried across the valley, amplified by technology but sharpened by rage. "Elias Carter," she called, naming him for the first time. "Return what is mine. The sword chose me. You are nothing but a thief who clings to a fire he cannot control." Elias's stomach turned. He hadn't wanted this fight. He hadn't wanted her attention. But now the entire valley, both armies, waited for his answer. He raised his voice, steady though his heart thundered. "I didn't steal it. I tried to return it. It burned me. It marked me. And if that scares you, maybe you're not as chosen as you think." Gasps rippled through both sides. Soldiers shifted uneasily. Some even lowered their weapons. The queen's face hardened. "Then you will burn with it." She raised her blade high, and the army surged forward like a flood. The battle began. Artillery thundered. The earth split under fire. Lines of soldiers clashed in chaos. Humans against Kalari, flesh against steel. Elias fought in the thick of it, his squad by his side. His rifle roared, his burned hand clenched every time he reloaded. But something strange happened. Wherever he stood, soldiers rallied. Fear turned to fury. Men who would have broken instead held their ground. Women who would have faltered pressed forward with new strength. The mark glowed beneath his bandages, faint but steady, as if feeding them courage. The enemy noticed too. Kalari soldiers hesitated when they saw him. Some refused to attack directly, their eyes flicking to his hand as if it were poison. Others rushed recklessly, desperate to silence him, but none succeeded. He wasn't stronger. He wasn't faster. But he was becoming something greater, a symbol that could not be ignored. Hours passed. The battlefield was fire and smoke, bodies and ruin. Elias's squad was bloodied but unbroken. Then through the haze he saw her, the queen herself, striding onto the field, her blade blazing like a star. Every step she took cut through soldiers as if they were nothing. No rifle could bring her down. No wall could slow her. She was coming for him. Elias's chest tightened. His legs wanted to run, but the eyes of thousands pinned him in place. This was no longer a battle between armies. This was between him and her. The clash was sudden. The queen's blade came down with a force that shook the earth. Elias barely dodged, the heat of the strike searing his skin. He rolled, scrambled, and fired, his bullets sparking uselessly off her armor. She swung again, faster than he could follow. The strike caught his chest plate, throwing him to the ground. The world blurred. His ears rang. His vision swam. The queen stood over him, her sword raised for the final blow. "Die, pretender," she spat. Elias lifted his burned hand to shield himself. Instinct, nothing more. The blade struck, and the battlefield exploded with light. A shockwave tore through the valley. Soldiers on both sides staggered, blinded. The queen's sword had stopped, not piercing Elias, not burning him, but locked against the scar on his palm. The mark blazed like fire, brighter than the sun. The steel trembled. The queen gasped, her strength straining against something she could not control. The sword refused her. Elias, panting, eyes wide, pushed upward with his burned hand. The blade recoiled, flaring with sparks, and for a moment it felt alive, caught between its old master and the man it had marked. The soldiers saw it. Everyone saw it. The queen, the invincible, was forced back by a single man. The battle froze. Kalari soldiers hesitated, their discipline cracking. Humans surged forward with new fury, driving the enemy back. The valley roared with chaos, but the focus remained on the two figures at its heart. Elias on his knees, scar burning like fire. The queen retreating, her face pale with fury. "You?" she whispered, shaking with rage. "You are not chosen. You are nothing." Her words rang hollow, because everyone watching had already decided. By nightfall, the queen's army retreated. The humans stood bloodied, broken, but victorious. Fires burned across the valley, the smoke rising like a signal to the stars. Elias sat slumped against a ruined wall, exhausted, his burned hand glowing faintly in the dark. His squad tended to him, their voices full of awe. "You stopped her," one whispered. "You made her retreat," said another. "She's afraid of you." Elias shook his head weakly. "No, she's not afraid of me. She's afraid of what the sword has become." But deep down he wondered, was it the sword that had changed? Or was it him? That night, as the soldiers celebrated their impossible survival, the legend grew tenfold. The man who faced the queen and lived. The man whose hand burned brighter than her blade. The man who forced her to retreat. Elias Carter. The name carried across the stars, and with every whisper, every story, the queen's fury deepened. She had lost more than a battle. She had lost control of her greatest weapon. The battlefield still smoked. Elias stood among the ruins, his chest aching, his burned hand glowing faintly beneath the bandages. Around him, soldiers cheered, sang, and shouted his name. They called him a hero. They called him chosen. But Elias didn't feel like either. He remembered the queen's face. Not afraid. Not broken, but calculating. He knew retreat didn't mean defeat. It meant she was changing the game. Days later, word spread across the galaxy. The Queen had spoken again. Her voice carried on every intercepted signal, her message sharp as a blade. You believe he is chosen? Then hear the truth. He is no savior. He is the spark that will burn you all. Her words spread like poison. Not an army's roar, but a whisper in every ear. And worse, with her words came images. Cities burning. Outposts falling. Villages reduced to ash. Her army moved with precision, not striking strongholds, but the smallest places. Places where ordinary people lived. She wasn't after Elias's soldiers. She was after his story. Every raid, every massacre carried the same message. This happened because of him. At first, Elias refused to believe it. They've always attacked our people, he told his commander. This isn't new. But then reports came from his own village, the place he grew up. The Queen's soldiers hadn't just attacked it. They had left his name carved into the ruins. This is the price of following the marked man. Elias's chest tightened. His past, his family, his home, it was all part of the battlefield now. The Queen wasn't trying to kill him. She was trying to break him. The soldiers noticed the change. At first, they were unstoppable. They charged into fights shouting his name. They believed the mark made them untouchable. But as the Queen's message spread, their confidence wavered. They asked questions in the dark of night. What if she's right? What if following him is why she burns our homes? What if the mark is a curse? The same fire that gave them courage now threatened to consume them. One evening, Elias sat with his squad by the dying fire. They didn't laugh like they used to. They didn't boast or tell stories. They only stared into the flames. Finally, one of them broke the silence. Elias, do you ever think she's right? That this mark isn't a gift? That maybe it's just a curse we're dragging with us? Elias didn't answer at first. His burned hand throbbed, the scar glowing faintly through the bandages. He wanted to say no. He wanted to tell them it was all lies, but the truth was he wasn't sure. I don't know, he whispered. But I know this, she's afraid. She wouldn't burn villages, she wouldn't whisper poison if she wasn't. He looked at each of them, his voice hardening. She wants us to believe we're cursed, because if we believe that, she wins without lifting her blade, and I won't give her that victory. His words steadied them, but even as his squad nodded, he could feel the doubt lingering in their eyes. Far away, the Queen stood in her chamber, her blade resting in her lap. The sword pulsed faintly, but not for her. Never for her anymore, she stared at its glow with hatred. You will not abandon me for him, she whispered. I forged empires with you. I bled worlds for you. You are mine. Her reflection in the steel wavered. For a moment, it almost looked like Elias's face staring back. The Queen's fury shook the room. If fear and doubt were not enough, she would take more. She would take what Elias could not bear to lose. The strike came days later. Elias and his unit were moving through a ruined city when the ambush hit. Explosions rocked the streets. Snipers fired from hidden towers. Civilians screamed, trapped in the crossfire. But this was no ordinary battle. The Kalari didn't push toward Elias's men. They pushed toward the civilians, hurting them, cornering them, threatening them. Save them, one of his soldiers shouted. They're bait, another warned. Elias knew the truth. The Queen had set the trap not to kill soldiers, but to force him into a choice, fight to win, or fight to protect. Either way, people would die, and the story would be rewritten. Elias charged. His squad followed, not for orders, but for loyalty. They tore through the ambush, pulling civilians to safety, fighting street by street. The mark on Elias's hand blazed hotter than ever, burning through his bandages, guiding him like a torch in the dark. Every time he raised it, the enemy faltered. Every time he touched one, their weapons smoked, their resolve cracked. By nightfall, the civilians were safe. The city still burned, but they had survived. The Queen's soldiers retreated. But before they vanished, they left behind banners painted with her mark, drenched in red. The message was clear. He cannot protect you all. That night, Elias sat alone on the rubble, staring at the families huddled together. Children clung to their parents. Old men cried quietly. Women prayed to gods he didn't know. They looked at him not with fear but with hope. Hope he didn't feel worthy of. His burned hand throbbed, glowing faintly. He clenched it into a fist. She won't stop, he whispered to himself. Not until I break. Not until they stop believing. For the first time, he lifted his face to the stars, to the galaxy listening, and made a vow. She wants to play with fear? Then I'll give them something greater than fear. I'll give them something she can never touch. His voice was steady now. His doubt was gone. She wants me to be a curse? Fine. Then I'll be her curse. The scar pulsed once, bright and strong, as if the sword itself agreed. The galaxy was listening. Every world, every colony, every outpost had heard the stories. The human who survived the Queen's sword. The soldier who faced her on the battlefield and lived. The man whose scar glowed with a fire no army could extinguish. His name traveled faster than ships. Faster than light, Elias Carter. The marked man. At first it was whispers. Kalari deserters who had grown tired of endless wars. Traitors who claimed they saw him raise his hand and drive back assassins. Mercenaries who swore the Queen herself had fled from him. Then the whispers grew louder. In hidden caves, resistance groups spoke his name as if it were a banner. On captured frequencies, rebels broadcast his story to the stars. In markets and taverns, his legend was told in 50 different ways, each more impossible than the last. Some said his blood burned like fire. Some said the sword itself spoke to him in dreams. Some said he was not a man at all, but a messenger sent from beyond the stars. Elias heard none of it directly, but everywhere he went he saw the signs. Flags painted with a handprint, murals of his scarred palm glowing like a sun, armies that had never fought together before now marching side by side, united not by treaties, but by his story. Elias didn't want to be anyone's savior. But one by one, they came to him. The first delegation arrived quietly, slipping into the human camp under cover of night. They weren't human. Their scaled skin shimmered under the torchlight, their long eyes cautious. They were leaders of a small alien colony the Queen had oppressed for years. They bowed to Elias. "We have no reason to trust your kind," their leader said. "But the Queen fears you, and if she fears you, we will follow you." Before Elias could answer, another group came and then another. Within days, emissaries of half a dozen worlds stood before him, each different, each scarred by war, each unwilling to follow one another, but all willing to follow him. The weight crushed Elias. He sat with his squad late one night, his burned hand glowing faintly in the firelight. "This is insane," he whispered. "I'm not a leader. I'm not a general. I'm just a soldier who got unlucky." His squad looked at him quietly. Then one of them, a young private, spoke. "Unlucky? You faced the Queen herself. You stopped her blade with your bare hand. You're not unlucky, Elias. You're the proof we've been waiting for." Elias stared at the fire, his jaw tight. Proof. That was the word. Not proof of his strength. Not proof of his destiny. Proof that the Queen could bleed. Far away, the Queen seethed in her citadel. Reports poured in of rebellions rising where none had before. Villages arming themselves, soldiers deserting, entire factions declaring independence, all under one banner, not her own. Him, Elias Carter. The name cut her like a blade. She stood before her mirror, her sword blazing in her grip. But when she looked into the steel, she didn't see herself. She saw him, his burned hand, his steady eyes, his refusal to kneel, and for the first time in years she felt something she had buried long ago. Fear. The rebellion spread faster than her armies could crush them. On the desert world of Korth, farmers raised rifles and fought off her patrols, shouting Elias's name as their war cry. On the frozen colonies of Jorah, miners carved his mark into the ice, rallying entire cities to fight. Even in the heart of her empire, her own soldiers painted his handprint on their armor, a silent rebellion beneath her nose. The Queen sent message after message, declaring him a fraud, a curse, a liar, but the more she shouted, the less they believed her, because they had seen him, and she had fled. Elias tried to stay on the ground, with his squad fighting like he always had, but it became impossible. Everywhere he went, armies formed around him. Leaders begged for his guidance. Civilians clung to him like a lifeline. He was no longer just a soldier, he was a symbol, and symbols could not hide. One night, as the camp slept, Elias stood on a ridge alone. His burned hand pulsed softly in the dark. He whispered to himself. I never wanted this. A voice answered him, not his own. Not human, not spoken in words, but carried in the throb of his scar. But they need it. Elias's breath caught. His heart pounded. For the first time he realized the truth. The mark was not just a burden, it was alive, and it had chosen. The next morning, Elias stood before the largest gathering he had ever seen. Humans, aliens, deserters, rebels, all together, all waiting. He looked at their faces, faces full of scars, of fear, of hope, faces that had nothing in common but one thing: belief. Elias raised his hand. The glow spread across the crowd like sunlight. We are not here because of me, he said. We are here because of her, because she has ruled us with fear, and because we refuse to bow to it anymore. She wanted me to be a curse, but together we'll make this mark her downfall. The army roared, their voices shaking the ground, and for the first time, Elias didn't feel like he was lying. The Queen's spies carried the news back to her. They told her of the gathering, of the oath Elias had sworn, of the armies now standing under his name. The Queen's eyes narrowed. Her blade trembled in her grip. Then she spoke, her voice cold as the void. Then I will burn the galaxy itself, if that's what it takes to silence him. And the sword pulsed in her hand. Weakly, almost in defiance, the galaxy was ready. The rebellion had begun, and at its heart stood a soldier who had never wanted any of it. Elias Carter, the marked man. The galaxy was burning. World after world had risen against the Queen. Her armies still marched. Her fleet still raged across the stars, but the fire of rebellion spread faster than she could smother it. And at the heart of it all was one man, Elias Carter, the marked man. The final battle was not planned. It erupted like a storm. The Queen herself descended from her citadel, no longer willing to watch from the shadows. She rode at the head of her black-armored guard, her blade blazing like a dying star. Her target was not a city, not a stronghold, not even a fleet. It was him. She had one goal: destroy Elias before the rebellion consumed her empire completely. The field stretched wide beneath a shattered sky. Smoke from burning cities curled upward. Broken ships littered the ground like bones. On one side stood the Queen, her sword alive with dark fire, her army stretching behind her. On the other stood Elias, alone at first. Just a soldier, scarred and tired, the mark on his hand glowing faintly. But then one by one shadows moved behind him. His squad, his allies, rebels, refugees, soldiers from 100 different worlds. An army built not on fear, but on defiance. The Queen's voice thundered across the battlefield. You dare raise them against me? You dare steal what is mine? Her sword flared, the ground trembling under its power. Elias raised his burned hand, steady and unflinching. They don't belong to you. Not anymore. The Queen's eyes narrowed. Then you will fall. Elias Carter, she charged. The world shook when her blade struck. Her power was endless, each strike heavy enough to split stone, to shatter metal, to crush men. But every time her sword came down, Elias's hand rose to meet it. The mark blazed brighter with each blow. Sparks leapt like lightning. The Queen roared, her fury shaking the air. Why won't you break? Elias gritted his teeth. Because I'm not fighting for myself. He shoved her back, the ground cracking under their feet. I'm fighting for them. Behind him, the rebel army roared in answer, their voices rolling like thunder. The Queen's rage turned wild. Her strikes grew desperate, her movements erratic. The sword burned in her hand, but the fire sputtered, like a beast straining against its master. For a heartbeat, Elias saw it. The sword didn't want her. It had chosen once before. And it was choosing again. The Queen screamed, swinging in a wild arc meant to end everything. Elias caught the blade with his bare palm. The mark ignited. The battlefield lit with blinding fire. The glow surged down the blade, ripping it from her grip. The Queen staggered, her scream breaking into silence. The sword burned like a sun in Elias's hand. It felt alive, and it wasn't fighting him. It was waiting. For a long moment, silence held the field. The Queen fell to her knees, staring at him with disbelief, with terror. It was mine, she whispered. It was always mine. Elias shook his head. His voice was steady, though his body shook from the weight of the power in his hand. No, it was never yours. It was only ever fear, and fear doesn't last. He raised the sword high. Behind him, thousands of voices cried out as one. The queen tried to rise, but her strength was gone. The fire that had carried her for years had left her, and with a single strike, Elias ended her reign. The battlefield was still. Smoke drifted. The echoes of the final roar faded into the wind, and then slowly soldiers laid down their weapons. Some knelt, some wept. The queen's empire had fallen in one moment, not because of a fleet, not because of an army, because of a man who had refused to bow. Elias stood in the center of it all, the sword glowing faintly in his grip. For the first time, it didn't burn him. It felt warm, like a heartbeat in his hand. He looked at the armies gathered around him, humans, aliens, rebels. They all stared at him as if he were more than human, more than a soldier. But Elias only felt tired. "I'm no king," he said softly. "No savior. Just a man who wouldn't let go." He lowered the sword. The glow faded. The weapon, once the heart of an empire, lay silent. The war was over. The galaxy changed in the years that followed. New alliances rose. Worlds once chained found freedom. The rebellion became a council, not ruled by one, but guided by many. And though Elias never sought power, his name became legend, the marked man, the one who had stood against a queen and broken her. Songs were written, statues raised, murals painted, but to him none of that mattered, because when he looked at his hand, he didn't see glory. He saw a scar, a reminder that even the smallest act of defiance can ignite a fire strong enough to burn an empire down. And in the quiet places of the galaxy, where people told stories under the stars, they always ended the same way, not with the queen's fall. Not with the sword, but with the simple truth of one man: humanity does not bow.